it is.
Yeah, that works.
All right, it's time for us to get started. Who has mics? We're doing some. We got Caleb. I got Gary. I just got two. I bet John Dean's running out with a mic. Okay, John Dean's got it. Okay, if you'd like to scan that QR code with your phone, and we're going to do some things with that here in just a moment. We had a few technical difficulties, but we'll still be able to use it this morning and see, or this evening, see how that goes. All right. Caleb, you have a mic. Will you lead us in a prayer real quick?
Let's pray. Dear God, we come to you now, and we thank you so much for the opportunity to come here in the middle of the week and to have a reprieve from the world, but to be able to take what we learn here and to apply it to our lives and to go back out into the world boldly for you, and help us to do just that. Help us to keep our minds concentrated on tonight's class and listen as we hear your word, and help us to always apply it to our lives and teach others. In Jesus' name, amen.
Hey. So as we get started tonight, somebody tell me what we mean by the term crucial conversation. What does that phrase mean? What does it mean? Crucial conversation. Stakes are high. Okay?
Emotions are high.
What's that?
Emotions.
Emotions are high.
Yeah.
Okay? What's that? Opposing opinions. Yeah. Impact. Okay. Usually there's a lot to lose, at least from your perspective, right? So the first question we were going to ask here, if we can get, well, if I can find there we go. The first thing we want to ask is, if you were to have a crucial conversation this week, who would it most likely be with? So on your phone there, that question should come up, and you should just type in, and those should hopefully magically appear here in a word cloud soon. And I think that's an interesting question just for us to kind of figure out and to think about. As you kind of survey your life, there's certain people that may be higher on the list. Now, as we sat down together, Jonathan said, what?
I spent a good 4 hours in crucial conversations at work today, just with various items. So, this applies in various aspects of our life. It may be family, maybe work, maybe loved ones. There's a lot of different directions that can go.
Okay. Some of you are naming people here. Peyton Long feels seen, I think, right now. Yeah. Kids. A big one here. Out of the votes we have, 3 of them are spouse. So when you think about that, I think that's probably high on a lot of our list, is the idea of a spouse or a family member. Somebody got a little more specific with wife. For most of us, that's probably the number one way we're going to have some kind of interaction that turns into a crucial conversation. There have been 3 things we've established last week that, I think I asked this wrong in the book about making it safe, but it should be really how to control the conversation and keep it from getting out of hand. And just to review where we're at on that, the first of those was to watch for the turn. And what do we mean by watch for the turn? When we say watch for the turn, what do we mean? Anybody? What's that? Emotions will change. Yeah. What else, Dave?
Yeah, maybe the expressions of the person. You can tell that as the conversation progresses, it goes down.
Okay. A lot of times we're talking about watch for the turn. Part of that's the content of what's saying, but more of it is how it's being said. So you're looking for, a lot of times, nonverbal things even.
Yeah. Or what's not said.
Or what's not said. And one of the things that's interesting about that, by the way, is in our digital age and how many things, I've not been a huge group phone call person, you know? Is it group call? What do they call that? Conference call.
Conference
There it is.
call, yeah.
I had a friend one time, we were on a trip one time together, and he had a conference call, and I got to listen in on that, and that would be a nightmare. Because, why would I say that's a nightmare? Why is a conference call a nightmare? Okay, generally everybody's speaking at once, and that doesn't mean they're intentionally interrupting. It's just the nature of the beast. Right. What else? You can't read the other person. It's hard. And even with Zoom, a lot of times, people turn their cameras off. The other thing I notice is that, generally speaking, a conference call, if you're not speaking, you mute the conference call, and you're really not paying attention anyway. Right?
Until you forget that you left your camera on and you get caught.
Yeah, and you get caught for doing that. Right. So it's just kind of interesting from that standpoint to think about how that's hard, because you want to, especially the nonverbal clues are huge.
Absolutely.
So, secondly, would be to check my motives. What do we mean by check my motives? Why are we checking our motives in the conversation? Dave? Right, because one of the big things about that is I really can't check Jonathan's motives, because at best that's an assumption, but I can evaluate my own motives, right?
Right, and I think too, as we go through a conversation, especially difficult, critical conversations, emotion does play a role in how we respond, and our motive can change throughout that conversation if we're not careful as we become emotional.
Right, and I think one of the things about that is if you're watching for the turn and they're becoming emotional and they're starting to show these nonverbal cues especially, I need to check my motives to see what I did to make them turn that way. That's part of why we check the most. And then thirdly, the thing is what we've been talking about last week and this week, which is just make it safe. And what do we mean by make it safe? What does it mean to make the conversation safe? Anybody? I know it's a review. John? Dean.
When conversations go south, people start holding things in and not sharing what should be shared.
Okay.
And so if you can stop it from going south and you can keep the conversation on a safe level, on a trusting level, then the things that really do need to be communicated can find their way out of each person.
Yeah, what's interesting about that too is like you have that fight or flight adrenaline reaction in a verbal conversation, just like a physical altercation. And so you may withhold information in both circumstances, but you may withhold information and withdraw, or you may withhold information and go on the attack. And what happens when that goes on is nothing productive is happening. So it is possible, and I think this is the thing we said last week, just to review. It's possible to have a high-stakes conversation that goes well, even if there's a challenge involved that somebody has to change, as long as everybody feels safe. Now, this happens in two ways. One we talked about last week was, one way that you keep a conversation safe is you share a common purpose. You share a common purpose. And we talked about purpose last week. This week, we're going to talk about the idea of respect, Jonathan. We're going to talk about believing the other person respects me, but also respecting the other person.
Yeah, and that kind of the notes I had on that, to that point, are the content of what we're talking about. I know some of the things we've talked about are those contents and the conditions of that conversation. And if we all know we're going into it with the same end goal, that helps create that safe space for the conversation rather than coming into it in an adversarial way where we're arguing even about what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. What does it mean to respect somebody in a conversation? What does that look like to you? What does it mean to respect somebody? Maybe some synonyms you might come up with, some different ways to say that. Yeah, John Dean?
I tell my players to listen with their eyes.
Okay.
Every practice, every game, you listen with your eyes.
Okay. So you
and I share
you
about,
eye contact as respect.
Yeah, I share that not just for me, but for your parents, for your friends, for your girlfriends, for everybody that it's a level of respect. It's a level of, what you're saying is important to me, so I'm going to give you my eyes, and I'm going to listen.
I'm going to key in on a word that maybe you didn't mean to emphasize, but I'm going to emphasize it, and that is, part of showing respect is that idea of importance, right? That you're showing that whatever the coach is saying is important to hear. And that, I think that's a huge key. Like, for you in that coaching situation, eye contact is what relates or communicates the idea of being important. But the respect is actually feeling that what you say is important. Another way to say that may be that it's valued.
Right.
That there's value.
And I think for me, that's the key. You value what the other person has to say, and you want to hear what the other person has to say. Not only that it has value to you, but you are drawing that information out from them, that you want it to be part of the conversation.
Right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And part of what you're doing is not just valuing the conversation, but you're actually valuing the other person. Okay? So when you value the other person, that ties into your motive, because you're saying, and use John's example, them looking at him means, Coach, I find you important. Not just the information that you're sharing right now, but you as our coach, I have value in that. Because what you really find out is, and when I coached at least, when kids don't do that, when they don't pay attention, it's not even so much about what you're saying at the time, it's the fact that they don't value you in that position at all, is what they're portraying.
And John, I love that idea of eye contact. I knew someone years ago through work who really wasn't the best worker, but having a conversation with them, that person, he made you feel like you were the only person in the world at the time when you're having a conversation with him. Nothing else mattered except you when he was talking to you. And eye contact was an intensity and focus, and you could just tell that what you were saying had value to it. It was very impressive and hard to do, but very important for us when we are having these conversations.
Absolutely. So that value is going to impact your motives in the conversation. And one of the ways I think that's going to impact that, by the way, is Philippians 2. Remember what verses 3 and 4 say in Philippians 2? What does that say? It's the passage that talks about being like Jesus and the way we interact with each other, and how is that manifested in verses 3 and 4 specifically. We talked about this last week, by the way. What's Chuck? That you esteem others or you value them. And how do you do that in that text? How do you show that in verses 3 and 4? Treat them more important than yourself, or as Chuck said, put them first. And specifically in this idea, putting really their desires first.
Right.
Right? Now, if we have a mutual purpose, and we talked about that some last week, that's easier because we realize, and that's one of the real main things of that, is to realize we have the same purpose, okay? When you do that, then you can put their purpose ahead of yours. But sometimes you don't have the same purpose, and you still have to kind of practice that. And so part of that is valuing. And then the other part of valuing them is realizing that they have information you may need, that you actually value their input. That gets back to the buckets being poured into the pool of meaning, that everybody pours their bucket in. And I think one of the big problems that breaks down in dialogue for us is we often enter these conversations kind of thinking, well, I don't really value their bucket very much before they've even poured it in. So one of the things we have to do is kind of remind ourselves, everybody's bucket has value. There may be things, even if I disagree with them, there's still things I could learn from that. And I think that's the hard thing to kind of keep in mind sometimes.
And I think that's one of the keys is valuing someone and valuing their input doesn't mean you agree with them. The two do not equate. You can still show respect, you can still show honor to someone, and disagree with them at the same time. Now, I think we're kind of taught to believe these days that's not the case. If you disagree with someone, you hate them. That's not true. We don't have to hold the same opinions in order to have a conversation.
Right. All right, let's try to go on to the next question if I can get it there. I think I can just do this here. Okay. This will just be a question and answer, so you can just enter your answers in. They'll scroll up there. How do you know you're being disrespected when it comes to a conversation? What are some ways that you know you are being disrespected? So again, if you've not logged in yet, you can take a screenshot of with your camera, scan in the QR code, and you can and go there. The first person that kind of got in says being interrupted, and I think that's a big one. They're not listening. Interrupted. That's coming up a couple of times. How they're talking or how I'm talked to. Motives are judged. Person turns away or looks at phone. I'll add in, for me, and we've talked about this before, the Apple Watch is a frustrating thing for me. And it was more frustrating before I got one, and now that I have one, I find myself more actively doing that because it just seems like that little buzz on your wrist is hard to ignore. So all of those are great answers here. Tone is another good one. Another one that's not up there could be facial expressions, right? When somebody really gets angry, where they really get elevated and they get kind of red-faced. I think all of those are great answers, and those cover most of the answers I had in that idea. I will say this, those things change based on who you're talking to, don't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah? Aren't there some people that can get away with some of those things with you and other people cannot? Caleb says no, but I doubt that's true.
That was a joke.
Yeah, because I bet that I would not be given as much grace in a conversation with Caleb interrupting him as Victoria would. Why is that? Because he doesn't live with me 24/7. And so we tend to show grace in some of these things, unless we're already elevated, by the way. And that's not always standard or constant. And there's some people in my life I've given license to talk to me in ways that I would not let anybody else talk to. My best friend, who's a preacher in Florida, he and I are pretty animated with each other. And if other people talk to me that way, I think I would be upset. And then within 5 minutes, he and I can be like, hey, how are the kids? Everything's fine because we have, to a degree, empowered each other to kind of almost be ugly to each other. My wife's heard me before and goes, y'all don't like each other very much. No, we love each other. It's just that kind of a relationship. And so I think it's interesting. Sarcasm mentioned was a great one. Told to be quiet. Great answers. Those are great answers. We've got more people typing.
Yeah, and some of that is knowing who you're talking to. And we can't always know them in depth. And I go back to the first experience I had, again, bringing work into it, dealing with customers in the Northeast and boroughs of New York City. And our custom is being polite, yes sir, talking to everybody. We'd call those guys and they would just be yelling at us and cussing at us and I'm thinking, what did we do wrong? It's not that we did anything wrong, but we're being polite. And to them, that's disrespectful. They wanted us to yell back at them and be rude to them back. And you have to know who you're talking to sometimes, and to Terry's point, that to know how to have that conversation.
Right. And listen, I'm going to talk to Peyton in a completely way than I talk to the elders. Right? And part of that is Peyton's my kid, and generally speaking, until recently, this used to always be true, all the elders are older than me. Thanks, Jonathan, for destroying that. But anyway, but the station, right? Just the role they fill. And not so much, by the way, to clear this up, not that I view Jonathan as my boss, but I view him as somebody who's worthy of honor because of the role he fills, shepherding the flock. And my son is my son. And so we're going to interact with those people differently, and we're going to show different levels of respect for them. And so all of that's important to kind of keep in mind from that standpoint. So, true or false? Here's some questions. Well, hold up. How does it make you feel when somebody disrespects you, by the way? How does it make you feel? Angry? Okay. Yeah. It's a good word. Hurt?
Yeah.
Okay.
Frustrated?
Frustrated? What else?
You don't want to continue, yeah.
It's pointless. Yeah, you've probably said at some point, well, this isn't going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
Right? The author has a great illustration of this, and I really like it, is that respect is like air. as long as we have oxygen in the room, nobody really notices it or thinks about it, right? None of you are thinking about it, man, it's great that we have oxygen in the auditorium tonight, right? But if oxygen were about to disappear, what would happen? That's all you can think about, right? And the same thing's with respect. If respect is the oxygen of your conversation. If respect starts to disappear, what happens? All you can think about is all you can think about. By the way, I didn't tell you this, but on your tab, there is a Q&A, by the way, on this app. If you wanted to look at the top and you wanted to ask a question or comment without speaking out, that's also open for you here. I meant to say that earlier. So go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, when we're thinking about disrespect, is it possible for someone to be disrespectful toward me while thinking they're being respectful? Can it be unintentional? Yeah, very easily. But does that change how I feel? No. So even if we unintentionally disrespect someone, we have to recognize, again, watch for the turn, watch for those signs, and kind of reset and go back to where we messed up. Even if it's unintentional, that perception shapes their reality of the conversation. We have to address that. Caleb?
Yeah, just I guess to touch on that as well as kind of everything that we've spoken about, especially to your point of where you think somebody's being disrespectful towards you, but they're actually not, especially if they're from a different culture. Recently, I was on a work trip, and there's a guy from Boston who we were talking to, and to somebody who didn't know him, it might seem that he was getting heated. For him, he was just having a regular conversation, and one of my coworkers was beside herself thinking that he was upset with her, and I was like, no, he's just talking how he normally talks. I think it's a two-sided coin. It's important to know your audience and to give them grace where grace is due. But then on the flip side of that, it's very apparent when somebody's not actively listening to you. And I think that needs to be flowing both ways. Otherwise, you don't have that respect. You don't have that oxygen. And like you said, that's the only thing that you can think about.
Great comment. Great comment. So when the disrespect goes away, that's when everybody gets defensive, right? That's when all these things that we've talked about start happening. That's when we start doing them to them, interrupting, raising our voice, using sarcasm. All those things come out as a defense mechanism, as a response to you feeling disrespected. Yeah. Yeah, for those that may be listening, Dave says one of the outcomes is you repel them, that they just may want to be away from you. That ties back again to that adrenaline response, right, of fight or flight. They just want to fly. They just want to flee, get away from you as quickly as possible because of this. So that's a big deal. Okay, this is true and false questions that you're asked. First is, there are some people I don't respect entering a conversation. Is that true or false?
True.
True. True. Why?
History.
What's that? Past experience, history. Okay, what else? Their attitude. What, Eric? They're just not nice people. Okay, maybe we call it their reputation.
Sure. There you go.
Yeah, they have a reputation. What else maybe?
You have a preconceived, misguided opinion.
Preconceived, misguided opinion. Okay. Previous conversations. Yep. Dave? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I would say on the flip side of that, can we have a conversation with somebody whom we may not respect, but we respect their opinion? Maybe they are an expert in the field, but they're not a good person. So just because that person may not be respectable, that doesn't mean they're wrong. We have to be careful to separate their words from their actions sometimes.
I'll give a couple that I think we don't think about. One is past trauma with similar people. So what I mean by that is, let's say that you've had in the past a really negative interaction with shepherds, with elders somewhere. And every time you go into some interaction with elders in the future, even if it's not the same people, there's a part of you that's braced for that same negative interaction, just because of the context. And you may not enter that conversation with the right amount of respect, and it has nothing to do with the people involved, but rather the roles they feel based on previous things that you've gone through. Another one is just the awareness that you have a different set of morals. I think that's one of the things that sometimes we struggle with too, is if I'm going to have a conversation about biblical things with somebody I already know I disagree with on things, then I'm going to tend to not respect them as much based on that. Now, that's not how it should be, by the way, but we're talking about really just the reality of what we carry in. So some of it is, a lot of it, what we talked about is really our past baggage that we put on this other person. And that's not always fair, but it's just what happens. Okay? True or false, there are some people I lose respect for during a conversation. True. Why? Okay? If they disrespect you. So, a lot of things are up on the screen that you all put out there, that these answers, that's kind of what you're saying. Hey, when they respond to me this way, when they tell me to be quiet, or they respond with sarcasm, or they don't really listen to what I'm saying, or they talk over me, or they show no interest in me personally, they don't value me, I'm going to end up disrespecting them. And it's possible sometimes you enter that conversation respecting somebody and you leave that conversation with no respect for that person at all. Most of us have had that happen, haven't we? Let's say. And that's kind of a sad thing. Whatever. You know, in our marriage counseling, the guy that did our marriage counseling, did our wedding, was the guy I trained with for about 4 months. One of the things he said is, as a husband and wife, the word whatever is not allowed in your vocabulary under any circumstances. And we've tried to live by that. There's times that one of us will say that word and the other one quickly will say, Wilson said you could never use that word, which I'm not sure is the right response. But yeah, whatever. Let's look at some scriptures here because let's look at some scriptures here. Yeah.
I think that comes up most common. What do you want for dinner?
Whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. That doesn't count, by the way. My wife just says, I don't care. And I think I could have made a lot of money if I opened a restaurant called I Don't Care. But let's talk about some scripture, because I think one of the things is, if we kind of pay attention to scripture and what we're taught by scripture about other people, we should have an advantage because of our faith about humanity and the origin of humanity and who man is should change how we view other people. So let's talk about Genesis 1:26. Start in the garden. That seems to be a trend, right? But Genesis 1:26, what does it say? This is one of your questions in your book. What does it say that applies here? We're all made in God's image. Now, how does that apply to this, what we're talking about tonight? How does that apply? Okay, we should reflect God's image. So, in a sense, that applies in the sense that how I treat other people should be a reflection of how God treats His creation. And that's always with love and grace and mercy and forgiveness, right? What else, though?
None of us is above the other.
Nobody's above the other, okay? Yes.
Exactly.
Good. I like the way Marilyn said that. That despicable person you're talking to is made in God's image too. That's a great word. This person you have such contempt for is also made in God's image. Now, whether they're showing that or not doesn't change that fact. That's where our faith comes into play, right? I think that's the important thing. That's kind of a mic drop moment, by the way, Marilyn. I don't know if I could. I think I'll just move on. Let's go to Matthew 10:28. Matthew 10:28 as well. What do we have here? And this is a little bit of an interesting application, but it goes along the same line. Kind of taking it out of the context a little bit, proof texting, but that's okay. What do we find here? Any thoughts there? Okay, we know God's listening. Okay. What important thing is said here about us, our nature? Not the point of the verse, but it's said in the verse. Every one of us is made up of what?
Body and soul.
Yeah. Now, how does that impact everything, Jonathan? I mean, how would that change how I view other people?
Stealing from your notes a little bit.
Yeah.
But
That's why I give them to you.
yeah. Because that soul lives on. That soul is eternal. That soul has value to God, right? So that means all of us have value as well. Now, sometimes we have to dig a little deeper to find that value, but we all have value to God. God didn't send Jesus to die. Jesus didn't die on the cross because we're worthless. He died because we have value to him. And if God values every one of us, we need to value each other.
And Jesus didn't die just for Christian souls. He died for every soul, right? And I think that's, by the way, that doesn't mean everybody's saved. But he died so that every soul could be saved. That gives intrinsic value to every person. And then finally, Matthew 28:19, go make disciples of all the nations, baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. What is that? How does that impact this? What does Jesus want for every soul? Salvation. And what impacts somebody's salvation from your standpoint? What is evangelism, truthfully? You ever thought about that? What's that? Showing Jesus? Yeah. Preaching the gospel? Yep. I'll say this, that at its core, most primary meaning, evangelism is teaching the gospel. But there's an aspect where everything you do is part of evangelism. Because if you don't interact with other people correctly, you'll never have the chance to teach them the gospel. So therefore, the way you interact and the way you treat them in a conversation about something as mundane as buying something off of Marketplace could have an impact about somebody's soul and how you have the opportunity to teach them the gospel. One of the things when we, and we need to get some more, but we had printed up the little stickers of the heart on the sign, and one of the things we said is, now, if you put this on your car, don't go cut people off and be a road rage person, right? Because we don't want your bad driving associated with that heart, right? And I'll tell you this, one time I got cut off in Memphis by somebody, pulled out in front of me, I was very aggressive, and in their back windshield was a huge decal of Jesus wearing a crown of thorns on the cross. And I was just like, buddy, drive like Jesus. Like, what are you doing, right? So just remember that people see those kinds of things, and you've got to kind of keep that in mind. Now, to build on that, and this was the next couple of verses, if every human is valuable, that's what we've established from these passages, then what has Jesus said about how we treat every human? So the first of those passages, we don't have time to read all these, is Matthew 5, Sermon on the Mount, verses 43 through 48. What's that section about in the Sermon on the Mount? What's that? Loving everybody, Terry? Love your enemy. Because the Pharisees had taught, hey, love your neighbor as yourself, but you can go ahead and hate your enemy. And Jesus says, no, you've got to love your enemy. Because even tax collectors love their friends. And it's interesting, that conversation there. So we have to love everybody. Ephesians 4:32, be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. What does that mean? What does that mean? How does that apply if everybody has value? Now Jesus expects me to do what?
Be kind.
Be kind to people. Be forgiving. Be merciful. Be tenderhearted with people. Matthew 7:12. Whatever you wish others to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Now I've got this requirement to treat other people the way I want to be treated. And then the final one is an interesting one, and it's a great point. 1 Peter 3, 1 through 4. Now, this section is said to wives. But I want you to notice an application and apply it in every relationship. Here it says, wives, be subject to your husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives when they see your respectful and pure conduct. We can stop right there. What is that saying? In the context of a marriage, what's that saying about a wife? As an unbelieving husband, what's Peter saying? Her conduct can win him over. Not hiding the bulletin in his car, hoping he'll find some article, or sending him links to sermons to listen to. Back in the day, it was like leaving a tape in his cassette player, but that's long gone. Right? We date even myself there. But none of those manipulative things that maybe somebody does. The most important thing Peter says is the way you act to your husband in that relationship can win him over without even saying a word. That's powerful, isn't it? You think that applies to our relationships with other people as well?
If you don't show respect and value to someone in unimportant things of this world, why would they listen to you when it comes to something that is important, like their soul? They're not going to.
Yeah. All right, let's try to get to our last question here. There we go. How can you regain someone's respect once it's been lost? In other words, once all the oxygen has left the room, how do you put oxygen back in? What do you do? We'll wait for those answers. This is the toughest of the three questions, by the way.
It's a good question.
It's a good question, and it's hard. It's so good, I don't see anybody typing yet. So what do you do? Let's see, it's not going, so maybe that's why. There we go. Okay, I got consistent change in behavior. Apologize. For some reason, it's not coming up here, so we'll go with the screen. Change, let the people know you've changed. Like trust, easy to lose, hard to get back. Apology and action. Apologize, change behavior. Serve. What else? There we go. Got some more people typing. I think it's difficult.
Humbleness.
Yeah, humility. Ask their opinion. Try to re-engage them, especially if, like Dave said, they're repelling from you. Try to re-engage them. I think a big thing there is to realize if they've disengaged and you've lost respect, that's your fault. Like all the things that you're putting up there are admitting that you're the one who caused this. And that goes back to that idea of, evaluating my own motives. Be vulnerable, acknowledge your fault. Those are all great things. Be interested in what they're saying. Try to re-engage them about that. All great things.
I think one thing that kind of ties all these together is it requires effort on our part. It doesn't happen by accident. It takes time, it takes effort. It's something that we have to intentionally work towards to regain that respect.
Yeah, somebody says it won't be regained during that same conversation. You'd have to regain it by the next potential future conversation with that person. That may be true, but I don't know that that's absolutely true. And here's why. If you respond with the right humility in certain circumstances, you can recover bad conversations. If you stop and say, hey, look, I am completely out of line. I need you to forgive me about that. You can turn that around if it's a sincere apology. I want to illustrate this with remember last week we talked about how the spouse wants a couch? Remember that illustration? We had a bunch of illustrations. One of them was the spouse wants a couch. So let's say you're in there, guys, and your wife comes up and her laptop's already open and she's found a couch she wants. Leather couch, okay? And she comes up, shows you and says, or her phone and says, hey, we need to buy this couch. Now, it's possible you may have some questions. What are some possible questions you might ask if that
Why?
happens? What?
Why?
Why? How much? Somebody said whatever. That is never said in a relationship. What's that, Benny? What's wrong with the old one? Okay. Another one may be, hey, is this a good quality couch? Like, is it a good investment? Another one may be, Caleb identifies with that as the financial analyst in the room. Another one may be, hey, look, we got a lot of things to do in our house. Is this the highest priority? Now, what's the wife feel at this point? Probably deflated. Okay. Annoyed. Yeah. In the Kolb house, it's already been purchased. She's not annoyed. She probably feels interrogated. And do you think she feels disrespected?
Yeah.
Does that mean she's been disrespected, by the way? No. This is an interesting turn. Are any of those questions inappropriate? Not really. I mean, is it inappropriate for a husband to ask budgetary concerns? Or is this our greatest priority? Or is this a good purchase? Like,
So good questions.
yeah, by the way, if it's not your relationship and your couch, you think all those questions are fine. But when it becomes your conversation about your couch you want, they're not fine. Now, here's the important point. The auction has left the room because she feels interrogated, okay? So if he's not been disrespectful, what can he do? Because we're running out of time, let me give you some ideas. He can recode the behavior by making her feel safe and respected and say, listen, I know you want this couch. I want to talk about this couch. There's just some things we need to discuss before we do this. Another thing is, by the way, is to step out of that context for a moment. Stop talking about couches for just a moment and restore respect and then come back to it. And then finally, here's a quick one, and then I'm going to change it, and then I'll open the floor in a minute. Contrast. So say what you mean, but also explain what you don't mean. So you might go, listen, my questions may make you feel that I don't want a couch, and that's not it. I just want to understand why you're suggesting that we buy this couch and that we can afford it, and I want to talk about it. I am not saying no. Because what she heard was what?
No.
No. Is that what he intended? No. Okay. Now, different situation. She comes up with the laptop, and he kicks back, and he goes, great, here we go again. And she closes the laptop and walks away. Do you think she feels disrespected? Why? Because she was.
Yeah.
By the way, if this is you, husbands, call me and Duane. We can set you up for counseling quickly. How do you fix this? I will tell you there is only one way to fix this. What's that, Mark? Buy the couch. That is not true. By the way, that's how dumb husbands are, right? We think, well, just buy the couch then. But what's the problem, ladies?
He's going to be sleeping on the couch.
Yeah, he'll be sleeping on the couch. What, Nancy? Even if she gets the couch, she still feels disrespected. You didn't fix anything. Dave? You could, but none of that's going to be heard until you do the only thing that matters. What, Jason?
Oh wow,
Another accountant. Here we go.
that
It's gonna be
same
great.
exact scenario. We bought a couch at Sectional, and I said, okay, this is a good-looking couch. It looks like it's a good deal. We can get this couch if we sell our couch that we have, and it's just like an even exchange. So finding an alternative.
Right. This is where, again, I look at you if I'm there with my wife and I go, you are really dumb because you still have not got it. Like you're being practical, but you're missing the key ingredient.
You have disrespected your wife. What should you do
What's
first?
the only thing you can do to fix it? Apologize. Doesn't matter what you say until you sincerely apologize. Because here's the key, guys. You could go, listen, here's all these great alternatives. She doesn't hear a word. You know why? Because you have disrespected her and she does not trust you. And until you apologize and you sincerely apologize, nothing is going to fix it. None of your practical solutions matter. And here's the key about crucial conversations. This is true of a conversation with your wife about a couch, and it's true of any conversation where you've disrespected somebody. This answer that it won't be regained during that same conversation, it can be if you apologize. If you stop and you humble yourself and you say, I really messed this up. We need to start over. I was disrespectful. I am so sorry about that. Not fake, real.
And sometimes that real apology and really opening up to that person allows for greater trust going forward when you're willing to admit that you've been wrong. That can build stronger relationships in the future.
Absolutely. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. We are over time. I am so sorry, but thank you. It was great participation. Look forward to next week. Thank you so much.